Good evening. I've been watching what's going on in Los Angeles in America. Not particularly because it interests me personally or it affects me personally, but because I think that given the last few years, probably decades preceding it, right? But the spotlight has been on the events that have been happening across the West. And it's become more and more apparent to people that Western nations are facing the same sort of issues, right? And what are they? They are the importation of hundreds of thousands of millions and millions of people from different walks of life, different countries, right? And for America, I think the number's in the tens of millions of people that have just swarmed in. Ireland is facing the same issues, obviously. And it's not that these things are just happening and each respective nation is taking its time to kind of get the grips of it, and each respective government and state in these nations are working hard to rectify these issues and to make sure things are fine again, right? It's not, right? These things have been allowed to happen. They've been facilitated to happen. They have been promoted. They have been, the reality of it has been obscured by those that are in positions of power across the Western nations. There's some changes in different countries, and some of these changes are welcome, right? But the reason why I want to focus in on Los Angeles is because I think it signifies what could be or will be in the future for other Western nations, right? So there's an obvious attack going on in America. And you have Trump who was elected, whatever you think of him, he was elected by the people of America on the promise that he was going to deport those who were in the country illegally. So people who entered the country and their first automatic interaction with that country and its ways is to break the laws of that country, right? So he has allowed for ICE to go and get these people who are in America illegally and to just remove them, right? He has pushback from the state, the deep state, but it's not even that deep anymore. It's very surface. It's in your face and it's blatant, right? People that are opposing him, from the opposing party to the DOJ, right, the Department of Justice, the justice system itself with the courts and judges, all that sort of stuff. The media, obviously, are all in opposition to what Trump is doing, but they're not engaging with it honestly, right? So they're saying it's all a big attack on immigrants and it's racism and it's all this sort of stuff and it's tyranny and dictatorship. When the reality is, the man that's in power there, Trump, is trying to uphold the law by removing people out of the country who have no legal business in that country. They're not in the country lawfully. They broke the country's laws to enter the country. And by entering the country illegally, they broke the country's laws. He's, on the back of the support of the American people, is trying to rectify that situation. And what have we seen as a result of that? We had ICE that were going around Los Angeles trying to hoover up these gangs, essentially, right? A lot of them have flooded in from Mexico. And they're obviously, a lot of them are part of criminal gangs, and Trump designated some of these gangs terrorist organizations, right? So is it too far a stretch to assume that a lot of these people are linked in with the Mexican cartels, the drug cartels? No, of course not. From the drug cartels' perspective, it's in their best interest to expand networks into America. And if you have successive presidencies that have allowed for the borders to remain open and for these cartels to flood in there, of course they're going to do that. It's good business on their part, right? But it's bad business for America, and it's bad policy for America. And you now have a president over there that's trying to clean up, right? So he's going to see pushback. He's going to receive pushback, and he is. And he's seen this, he's getting this from many people in California, right? Including governors and including mayors of certain cities, right? And they're fanning the flames of it by saying, look, what you're seeing here of people smashing up the place, looting, attacking cops, attacking these ICE agents, right? And destroying the city. They're saying that it's a natural reaction to Trump's policies. Instead of getting on board with the truth of it, that many of these people are here illegally and they need to be removed, because otherwise the rule of law is just gone and you can do what you want, right? You can do what you want. So, not to mention the fact as well, right? So we've had many issues recorded of members, not just of these Mexican cartels, right? But you've had people who are known members of Hezbollah and other affiliated terrorist groups or gangs or outfits, whatever you want to call them, right? Who do not have the best interest of America, that specific nation, at heart. So they're going to go in there to do their own business. There's one who was arrested who admitted to being part of Hezbollah, and he was there to make a bomb in America, right? So you have this sort of stuff going on underneath the surface, and it's being concealed by politicians, the media. There's no real honest conversation coming from one side around it, right? And then that what's been recorded there and broadcast from American media generally is shown to the rest of the world, and then it's rinsed through the lens of each individual state or nation's broadcast media, right? So in Ireland we have RTE, and they show a specific lens or a specific perspective of what's going on in America, and it soaks into the common consensus, right? It soaks into kind of the default setting of Irish people's view of what's going on in America, and as a result of that, you have the view with a lot of people, right, who just consume in the shops, looking at front pages of the newspapers. You get little snippets of a story, right, and you get a colouring of what's going on. A colouring is an apt word, right, at the moment, because what you're looking at is an insurrection, which it's not an upfront and blatant war. It's blatant enough, right, but it's coloured under different terminology and different motivations, and the bad actors are being coloured as victims and honourable freedom fighters against a man who's trying to uphold the laws of the land of his nation, as he was elected to do. And he's coloured as the bad guy, right? And you're seeing the same thing in Ireland as well. And that's why these things are linked, right? So you have, in America, trucks pulling up, dropping off pallets of nicely stacked and organised cinder blocks and concrete blocks, right? Why? In the middle of a protest, right? A riot. They're just being dropped off. Who's paying for these? Who's paying for this? What company is hiring trucks, pallet trucking these pallet loads of blocks into these trucks and driving along and parking up in the middle of a city and dropping them off? Who's driving that truck? Who's paying the man to drive this truck or the woman to drive that truck? Who is involved in this, right? We've seen the same thing over the last few years of pallet loads of red bricks being dropped off in the middle of unstable situations where cities are being burnt, looted and destroyed. And then bang, here's loads of pallets of bricks. How convenient, right? So who's doing that? There's big money involved in this, right? And there's mayors then that are covering for this sort of stuff. They're running cover for the people that are involved in destroying the very city that they're elected to maintain some semblance of law and order around, right? So you're seeing a massive schism, right? You're seeing two sides of an argument here, or two sides of a war, essentially, because that's what's going on. You're seeing a soft war, a sneaky war, right? The underhanded war, the kind of war that intelligence agencies wage in different countries, right? They don't put on the American flag and say, we are here because we want to take over America and rule it. So we're trying to subvert the government that's in there now because we want to assume that power so we can implement our own plans. They're not doing that because people will go, hang on a second, that's not right, that's not honourable. So you see the same thing in Ireland now. So it's come out that the guy who was leaving off shots in the Carlow shopping centre over the last week or two, maybe 2 weeks at this time flies, right? He was after buying ammunition and guns from an undercover Garda. A member of the Irish police force was after selling this man guns and ammunition, right? This guy was arrested and charged for having these firearms and he was allowed out on bail, right? So while he was out on bail, again, if you've any examples of someone being charged with, and it's not like he could say, I just stumbled across these things and I happened to just pick them up 5 minutes before I got arrested with them. I was actually going to turn them into the guard station. An undercover guard had sold him these, so they knew that this man had criminal intent by way of the fact that he organised this purchase, right? He organised it. It's not, he couldn't say he stumbled across them. He planned, he bought them, and he had them, and he got arrested for it and charged, right? But he was allowed out on bail. If you've any example of anyone else in this country ever getting caught with guns and ammunition and being allowed out on bail, please let me know. And someone that's not a sneak, right? Someone that didn't make a deal to get out. So, subsequent to that, the guy is out on bail and then he goes off and lets off shots in a Carlow shopping centre. That's very suspicious, right? Very suspicious. And depending on which way you want to look at it, you could say, well, look, this guy came to the guards' attention, the guards understood him to be a potential threat or menace to people, and they wanted to set him up to see if he'd bite and buy the guns from an undercover guard, and he did. Okay, so why was he left out on bail then if he was such a perceived menace? Because you can flip that the other way and say, based on the guards' understanding of this guy being a menace, he was allowed out on bail, right? And America is a great sample to take because you can see how corrupt the judges are, how one-sided they are. A lot of them are nailing their flags to the mast, right? And it's obvious to see, right, that some of the decisions they're making. And then you can see that the same thing in Ireland, right? There's some scandalous judges, judge in title only, right? Because they're in no way a brehon and they're in no way facilitating the measuring and the balancing of justice and honour and law in this country, right? They are heavily leaning towards one side, right? And you could just suggest from the decisions they're continuously making, they're corrupt and probably blackmailed, right? So, and again, what are we looking at here? I think the beauty of what we're looking at, because you can get bogged down in the doom and gloom in it, right? But I think there's always a silver lining to be taken from these things. And I think one of the greatest silver linings from this is that we're seeing that civilization as it has been sold to us, society and the state as it has been sold to us, is a total fabrication. It is a matrix, right? It is something that has been dropped in front of our perception. It is a designed map, right? It is a movie that's been running in front of our eyes, if you want. We've been sitting in a theatre and we've been sold the semblance of stability and diplomacy and politics. And now we're starting to see that has been rotten to the core. For how long? For long enough for it to entrench itself so deeply in this nation and into each of our lives that they have been capable and willing and in their actions showing that they can wield whatever power they want in this country, right? Because they're doing whatever they want, and the way they're talking about people, it's expected from these people, right? But they're being bold enough now to come out and say the most ridiculous of things that on the face of it should disqualify them from leading any people. So they're elected as public servants or public representatives of the Irish people, while also claiming that there's not really any such thing as the Irish people. So if they don't believe there's any such thing as the Irish people, how can they possibly stand to represent Irish people, right? That's a given. But here we are, right? So the silver lining of that is that we get to see, okay, we've been living a lie. We've bought the lie that was sold to us, which is that the country's running nicely and people are doing their best and all that sort of stuff, right? So where are we? expect the worst and hope for the best, right? That's been something that I've lived by for as long as I can remember, or as long as I had the words to be able to phrase that to myself, right? And the actions that the way I would have behaved would have been that phrase before I probably even had the words for it, right? So expect the worst and hope for the best, or prepare for the worst and hope for the best, whatever way you want. You can be super negative and cynical and then expect the worst, or you can be positive and say, look, I'll just prepare for the worst. And then should that not happen, at least I'm prepared. Because if you prepare for the worst potential you can imagine, and that doesn't come to pass, well, then you're naturally prepared for anything that does come to pass, right? So looking at America and looking at what's going on in Los Angeles, and it's spreading to other cities as well, right? The infection of lies and deception that has been dictating Western nations for long enough to erode it and destabilize it significantly, of which we're seeing the fruits of now, is being cleansed. Largely in America, but other countries are following suit, right? As they're going to, because America is the Western powerhouse, right? It is what it is, and that's fine. So it's being cleansed. But it doesn't mean that people that have been actively trying to ruin Western nations and take control over Western nations' resources and the creativity, imagination, and the ability of Western peoples, they're not going to go quietly, right? They know their lives are on the line, right? Because Trump mentioned an insurrection, which is treasonous, which carries significant penalties legally and lawfully, right? Up to the point of execution. So this is a big game being played here, and the pot is, people are all in. It's all in for the pot, and it is win the lot or it is you're bust, right? So the side that have been trying to ruin things, we just call it simply, they know that their livelihood, their freedom, and possibly their lives are on the line. So they are going to wage and throw everything they can against their enemy, right? So it's nearly inevitable, given the same sort of currents and trajectories that Ireland is on with America and other nations, that, and given the same sort of philanthropic billionaires who've been funding these NGOs and charities for equal futures and social justice, open societies, right? All this sort of stuff. That money doesn't just stop in America, right? That's been flowing through nearly all Western nations. And the USAID and all that Doge stuff, that's what that revealed, right? That the CIA has been using that to channel colour revolutions in Western nations, to destabilise governments, to demoralise ethnic groups, demoralise native populations, so that they can dictate and control what's going on across the world. World control, right? World control. This is not surprising or shocking in any way. It shouldn't be, right? This is what history is built on. This is what history has been for millennia now. And it's just coming to the surface now in such a large way, right? Because we have the internet, we have the ability to see. I can watch what's going on in Los Angeles live right now. That has never existed before, that we know of, right? In modern recorded history, that has not existed, as long as we know, right? Or as far as we know. So, as what's going on in America, you can nearly expect to see similar things happen in Ireland, right? And England, and on and on and on, right? Do things get worse? Probably. Is there the potential for more of these shootings and more of these riots? Absolutely. And is there the potential for that to become more current than it already has, more widespread than isolated incidents in Ireland? Absolutely. So does that mean you just give up and fold and go, sure, look, what comes? No, not necessarily, right? So again, You prepare for the worst and you hope for the best, right? So the silver lining of this is, given the nonsense that we're looking at and the absolutely volatile and dangerous times that we're living in, right? It's incumbent on each of us to prepare for any outcome, right? So that if you're walking down the street with your family in any given day and you end up in the middle of something like this, you are as best prepared as you can be to navigate that and get yourself and your loved ones out safely, right? And what's lovely about it is, isn't that what we always should have been doing anyway, right? So the reason why we've been able to be subverted and demoralized is because we've allowed ourselves to become weak and distracted and kind of semi-satiated with distractions, right? A lot of our attention is focused externally. So if you're constantly focusing your attention externally and being entertained or entrained from without, all of those minutes you devoted are minutes that you've taken away from making yourself better and more prepared, intellectually, emotionally, and physically, for any given outcome that may manifest in the future, right? So Western nations have become weak. We've lost our strength. We've given over our strength and our responsibility and our duty to elected officials because we bought the lie that if we did so, they would assure us of security, abundance, and all of that sort of stuff, and fairness and justice. And now we're seeing that that was a big load of lies, right? And we bought that. So the answer to what's going on here is to find our strength again, to find our voice again, and to withdraw the responsibility that we've given to other people for our own lives and our safety and the assurance of our future. Withdraw that by accepting the responsibility of ourselves, right? Bettering ourselves, building up communities with ourselves again. So maybe instead of watching Squid Games when it comes out, right, we take one night where we go and meet a neighbour. I don't like him. I haven't talked to him in years. There you go. And are you better or worse for having a poor relationship with your neighbours? You're worse off, right? You're worse off. So is it not in your best interest to at least have some sort of amicable relationship with them? Do you even know who they are, right? So there's a start, right? There's a start. Because we can point to problems that we can't fix. The serenity prayer, right? So God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, which are the decisions that other people are making. Gone out of my head now. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, which are internal things. Relationship with myself, the relationship with the activities that I engage in, and the relationship that I have, as far as I can influence it, with the people around me, with the community around me, right? And the wisdom to know the difference. And that's perfect, because that's the balance between it, right? Because if you don't understand, or you don't have the wisdom to be able to determine or to understand the things that you can change and the things that you can't, you can spend so much of your time and waste a lot of your time by pointing fingers at the things that you just can't change right now, right? It doesn't mean you ignore it, but it means you recognize your limitations in terms of this area of your life. And then you withdraw some of the energy that you're wasting in that area, and you funnel that and pump that into the areas in your life that you can change. And that makes you better. It makes your life better, right? It just simply does. It makes your relationships better. And it also, it polishes up the future. Because when you spend more time engaging with the things that you can change and influence, it broadens the horizons of what your future life is going to be. Because you're actually investing in yourself in a positive way, right? And that makes you feel good. It makes you feel powerful. It makes you feel like, I actually have control over some things. So if I have control over these areas, what happens if I just start making these better? What does that do for me? What does that do for the people around me? What does that do for the future of myself and whatever I care about? If that extends to all of Ireland and Irish people, then that's fine. If it doesn't, and it's just a tribal thing with yourself and the people that you care about and your family, however extended you want to look at that, then that's fine as well, right? But it's the balancing act. And I think that's the silver lining here, because Sigmund Freud in one of his last books spoke of, and look, there's a reason why he's so tarnished and people are put off even studying the man, right? But again, we will not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can disagree with 60, 50, 80% of the things that he said, the things that he did, his reasoning behind it, and the actions he took in order to examine the areas of knowledge that he was interested in. That's all fine, right? But we should allow ourselves to understand his ideas enough before we disregard them, right? Because some of the best things you can get from ideas are from engaging with ideas that you absolutely don't fall in line with, right? You don't agree with them. Because when you meet something you don't agree with, the natural question that poses to you, if you're switched on to listening to yourself, is, well, if I don't agree with it, then what do I think about it? Right? So even in engaging with things that you don't like or don't agree with, you learn something about yourself. You're investing in that internal area of your life, right? Instead of just going, I hate that, I don't like that, right? But anyway, Freud said in one of his last books, Civilization and Its Discontents, his main idea in that book was that perhaps there can be too much civilization, where things become so sanitized and pristine and neutralized, right, that some of the instinctual drives in man are quelled. They're neutralized, they're cut off, they're neglected, they're denied, right? So everyone just becomes the same form of grey. Everyone thinks the same to the same degree. Everyone acts the same. Their tone is always the same. They envision the same sort of future together because they're all being neutralized. Right, so there's always going to be the dialectic at play, right? Too much order will breed chaos because it has to. It just has to. In order for life to continue, chaos will have to emerge from restrictive order, and vice versa. Too much chaos will demand order. Because freedom can't exist with total freedom. Freedom is defined by the boundaries around which freedom is contained, right? So again, as negative and explosive and as unpredictable as things might be, there's always going to be a silver lining, provided that you can listen to yourself enough to be able to see what's going on in the external world and allow that to speak to you. Everything you perceive and observe will trigger a conversation in your own heart, your own mind, your own thoughts, whatever way you want to look at it, right? And this is a very, very ancient way of looking at things because it served people perfectly well, right? And so much of what we see in this modern world is designed to stop that thinking, right? And one example I will offer to people is, how many of you go to sleep at night with just your own mind for company? Just your own thinking. Or, and we're all guilty of it, I do it myself, do you stick the earphones in and listen to something as you go asleep? Now, imagine the difference between people who've spent years and years and years doing that. The telly on, the Walkman on, the phone in their ear. Is there a difference between people who spent a lot of their life being entertained by something external to themselves compared to people who didn't have that technology? They mastered their minds enough to be able to fall asleep to their own imaginings in their own mind's eye. Very different people. Very, very different people with a very different approach to life, a very different approach to community, right? Even the community in our own minds, right? The different parts of ourselves that chatter and bicker, right? And strive for dominance and strive to be heard in our own minds, right? So there's your silver lining, and that's the way out of it, is to devote a little bit more time, whatever way you want to break it down, to bettering yourself in the areas of your life that you can control and that you do have direct influence of, direct control and direct power of. And the rest, you do what you can. And you don't do what you know will not result in something that you want to see in this world, right? So, silver linings.